Hey everybody, Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. If you're looking for a Vespa here in San Diego, you know where to go, Vespa Motorsport. So today I'm going to give you Robot's thought of comparing a GTS to a Primavera. In the past I've covered all the different trims of the GTS. They all have the same power, whether it's just the base model GTS or you have the Super Sport. I know with cars, sometimes you get a Super Sport trim, you get the bigger motor, but they pretty much all have the same identical 300cc motor, and with the new 2025 models come in a 310cc motor. Actually, the 300cc motor is a 278. And some of the initial reports that I've read about the 310, don't get too excited. It's just going to be a little torquier. It's not going to have any higher of a top speed or feel like it's 25% more powerful or anything special like that. They pretty much did a lot of modifications to the motor that meet the newest standards that are found in Europe. And as a result, you get the little bump in displacement with the 2025 GTS. On the other hand, the Primavera, the motor's pretty much been unchanged. There's been minor changes to make it quieter and meet better emissions. But ever since 2015, when this was introduced in the North American market, I think it technically came out in 2014. There's just been subtle updates. Just recently they did an update, and I covered the update of the new style glove box. The dash is now matches the GTS standard dash. Of course, there's upper spec models that have the full LCD screen, which isn't something I really recommend. They don't really show you more stuff. They have a real pretty splash screen. They look cool. But they don't really have that much more functionality. But if you like it, the S model or the Super Tech model of the GTS, the S in either the Primavera or Sprint, will have that screen, and same with the GTS with the Super Tech model. Or actually they call it the Tech, the Primavera Tech for the 2025 model. So lots of different variations. They're mostly cosmetic. Sometimes you get little technical updates, such as that screen for the higher price point, but this video is mostly going to concentrate on the differences between the Primavera and the GTS 300, specifically the most current models. So to go from a Primavera to a GTS, you're looking at about a $2,000 price gap between these two. So this is around in the 6 range, this is in the 9 range, depending on the trim. You can go to the Vespa USA site and see the MSRP. And like my previous video, if you're looking for a non-current, you're always likely going to get a deal on it unless it's some extra special rare color. But if you want the most current model special order for you, you're probably more likely going to be paying closer to that MSRP price point, plus all the added normal dealer fees. We never charge added dealer markup. That's something that some dealers do, or they'll sell you extended warranties, other types of snake oil, but you have fees like the freight, the DMV fees, sales tax, tire fees. Those are like California fees that are specific. And of course, every single state's a little different, so you can, pretty much depending on where you're at, you might be paying 10% more than MSRP. Or maybe you'll get a good discount. You may be paying just under MSRP with all those fees, just depending on what it is. But pretty much a $2,000 price gap. I can go on price forever, but more to the tech specs. So of course the 300, 278 on this 2024 model, and the 150. Well, the engine's displacement pretty much kind of says it all. One's more powerful than the other. These are capable of pretty much up to about 80 miles an hour. These are good for up to about 65 miles per hour. It's still pretty good for a 150. You may be able to squeeze a little bit more going downhill, probably pushing the machine beyond its abilities. Same with the GTS. If you find downhill, you could hit the rev limiter pretty easily. You're definitely pushing it beyond its ability. If you're going to be going on the interstates, of course the GTS is going to be the way to go. This may be okay for an exit or two on an interstate, a freeway, or a highway. It technically is legal in the state of California, being over 150cc or 149cc. You can legally take this on the freeway versus a 125 that might go nearly just as fast as this isn't legal for the highway. So technically they're both legal for the highway. You're going to get much more pulling power out of the 300. You're going to get a lighter weight, tighter handling package with the 150. And I prefer to actually ride the smaller 150. They're just more nimble and fun on the back roads. But when you need power on the longer back roads or you want to do a longer trip, I've always felt the 300 is definitely the way to go. So it just depends on your use case. If you're never going to leave the confines of an urban environment, there's probably no need to go up to the big 300. There's a reason the Vespa 946, it was engineered with just a 150. It was designed for an urban environment where you never needed the extra speed, but you wanted all the style, you know, going out to dinner or whatever in an dense urban environment. And the 150, I think it suits very well, especially in somewhere like San Diego, urban environment, where you have secondary roads where you go 45 miles an hour. You know, there might be posted 35. This is going to have plenty of power. The 50s just don't really work in California. The laws don't favor the 50s here in California. They certainly just don't have enough power for anything except for dense urban environments. They're typically 30 to 40 mile an hour range scooters, but you have some states such as Florida, Colorado, Nevada. There's several more out there that have different laws that pertain to the 50cc scooter, which they do make a Vespa Primavera and Sprint 50. It's not something we sell too frequently. I don't have much knowledge on it. But pretty much the same package, a little bit lighter, and has a much smaller motor, but you're able to ride those with a different type of licensing and insurance requirement. So I'm not going to talk about 50s because they just don't really make sense here in California, because you need a class 1 motorcycle license regardless. If you're riding just 150, 300, or you're riding a 2-liter big cruiser or a liter sport bike, you know, big 1000cc sport bike. Same license, pretty much, the M1. A plus with the 300, they are slightly more comfortable if you're going to be doing longer distance touring riding. They have a slightly larger underseat compartment. It's not quite as deep as the 150. The 150 you can technically fit a full-size helmet. This you can fit kind of 2 3/4 face helmets underneath the GTS, so there's a little bit more storage volume-wise, but it doesn't necessarily fit the full-size helmet. You have obviously a wider body that gives you a little bit better weather protection. The narrow body, it's going to be a little bit easier. The straddle, believe it or not, the seat heights are very, very similar, like 5'6" or something. It's my height. I could easily flat foot this when it's off the center stand. No issue. If you kind of see, my knees are barely bent, and I'm going to actually put that in the side stand. And if I move over to the Primavera, I can tell I can flat foot a little bit easier. The reason being is the floorboard's definitely not quite as wide, but the seat height is really, really close. And the front of the seat, I notice on the Primavera and the Sprint, is a little narrower, even though they have a similar seat height. You don't always want to go by numbers, you know, just like horsepower. Having 100 horsepower in a 2,000-pound car is very different than a 4,000-pound car. So a lot of times you just have to get onto the scooter and feel it out. And just because you're inseam challenged and you're on your tippy toes, there's a lot of ways around that. You could wear motorcycle boots that have more of a rise, you know, another inch in rise. I'd always recommend adapting to the scooter versus trying to make the scooter adapt to you, such as lowering the suspension or cutting the seat, because you're going to compromise in comfort and handling when you do those kind of modifications. You're better off getting specific boots that work better for you, make you feel more confident on the scooter. So there's just a slight difference. A lot of people think this is substantially bigger and may not be a good first for a scooter. It certainly does have more power, but it also has better safety systems in it, such as two-wheel ABS versus just the front wheel ABS. It also has traction control found on the GTS 300 versus the 150. Then again, you have the argument it's just a much more linear and less power output. It's not as likely needed to have something like the traction control, while the 300's got enough torque to break the tire free, especially in a loose situation. If you have gravel on the road or wet roads, that's where the traction control, if you're a little bit on the throttle, pretty much giving it a whiskey throttle, as I like to call it, you know, it's more likely going to have the safety systems that protect you if you're over accelerating on the scooter. As for features, they're pretty similar. They both have the electronic actuator for the seat. They come with the fobs that open the seat. The main difference is all the GTS models have the keyless fob. Whether you like that or not, keep in mind that could be added expense down the road, because a keyless fob is much more expensive to replace versus the old trusty standard key that's found on the standard Primavera. You can get the tech model that does have keyless, if that's something you like. Keyless works, well, it works okay. I've talked about it in past videos. Kind of up to you if you want to ditch the key and go to the fob. You kind of don't have the choice on 2023 and later GTSs. They all come with the key fob here, which also has the clickers for opening the seat and flashing the lights. Both of them have glove boxes, which I think is a pretty handy tool that I've used. A lot of times I want to make a stop, put my wallet away, put my phone away, or maybe go through a toll booth. If I'm doing longer distance rides, I can easily open up that glove box while you're straddling a scooter, versus any other storage option where it's maybe behind you or underneath the seat. I think that's a pretty big plus. As for weight of the two scooters, it's a pretty good jump between the two. The posted curb weight of the GTS 300 is 360 pounds. I feel that's a little high. I always thought they were a little bit less than that, but that's what I looked up on the Vespa official site. They listed as 360 pounds, and that's with the 2¼ gallons of fuel, oil, the battery, everything in it, the curb weight. And the payload capacity is really similar between the two. It's about 400 pounds. So if you as a rider are 250 pounds, you can technically have a 150-pound passenger, or you're within the weight limit of either a Primavera or the GTS. That's something I never really looked up until just today, what the payload capacity is, or the total gross vehicle weight. And when you move to the Primavera, they have the weight listed anywhere from about 260 to 290 pounds, depending on where you find that number, the curb weight that is. And I know some are slightly heavier because they have a couple more trim pieces on it. So somewhere in that range, but it's essentially about 100 pounds less, being a lighter weight frame, a simpler air-cooled motor that weighs less, slightly narrower tires. The brake components are all smaller on the GTS, so they don't need to stop a scooter that goes as fast, and it doesn't weigh as much, so you don't need as big of components on it. So definitely I could tell the difference between the two. They are a little bit heavier than some of the competition scooters. You know, if you're going on to similar to a Hooligan 170, which is similar power range, but you go onto a Buddy Kick or even the PCX, they're all a little bit lighter. So, you know, something like a Buddy or a Buddy Kick, you're down to, I think it's 225 pounds, 235 pounds, so a good 30 pounds less. But you have that steel body, and just like the saying goes, you know, a Cadillac rides so much nicer because they put a lot of weight behind it. Just like any luxury cars, the premium finishes, premium ride quality that you get from a Vespa is at the expense of a little bit extra added weight, and that gives you a more premium feel. So you hop on a Buddy, it feels like a flexy little scooter, whenever you're hitting bumps, you can actually see the front end flutter, you know, because it's 30 pounds less, while the Vespa has an extremely stiff frame. You won't see any of that over those same kind of road conditions. All right, so the range in the fuel capacity. So GTS has 2¼ gallons. The Primavera's got 2 1/10 gallon. Very, very close in fuel tank capacity. The Primavera does have an edge at getting a little bit better fuel economy. So technically the range of the Primavera can be a little bit longer. But with around 2 gallons on hand of fuel capacity, and you can count on the miles per gallon of this GTS to be anywhere from about 75, and if you're really easy on it, maybe you can get 90, so that kind of gives you an idea. Your range is, I don't know, somewhere in the 150-mile range, not quite ever going to be 200. I have squeezed 200 miles out of a GTS 250, but it takes some very careful wrist restraint on that right hand. While with the Primavera, you know, being a lower output motor, it's always just going to get better fuel economy with the smaller motor. And you can get as high as 100, 110 miles per gallon, but you're probably always going to be getting over 75 miles per gallon on the Primavera. Again, your mileage may vary depending on how you ride it. Some people like using all the throttle they got. Some people just like cruising, and that pretty much determines your range. I think it's perfectly adequate. If you're in an urban environment, you may not fill up for 2 months. If you're on a road trip, you know, maybe you cover 600 miles, you might make, you know, 3-4 stops in a day. That seems reasonable enough to me. Sitting on one of these scooters for about 200 miles or more, that's quite a challenge in its own, you know, being on the saddle for 3-4 hours, that would be. So not really a concern. I feel like the fuel capacities are perfectly adequate. Tire size. Well, they all have 12-inch tires. That's something that's been standard on the whole Vespa line since around 2017, where everything got 12-inch tires on the Vespas, whether they're 50s, Primavera, Sprint. The GTSs have kind of always had 12-inch tires. But on the GTS, they typically come with the more premium Michelin City Grip 2 tires, while in some cases they have Savas or the Pirellis on the Primavera. Sometimes they have the Michelins, and oftentimes we will replace the Michelins, and they're one size narrower. So you're a 110 70/12 in the front versus a 120 70/12, and then on the back you go up 10 millimeters on the width, so 130 on the rear and a 120 on the rear for the Primavera. Here's a really important one that no one ever thinks about when buying a scooter. If you're self-servicing your scooter, of course we got everything to help you. I have every video out there to help you do that on YouTube, and you can buy everything from scooterwest.com. We have complete kits to do the service. A lot of people are very surprised that you actually need to service the scooters. I mean, you buy a modern car, it may say you don't need to do an oil change for 10,000 miles. You don't need to even touch the tires for 30,000 miles. Although if you want to properly maintain a gasoline car, you probably want to be changing that oil every 5,000 miles and be rotating those tires as well. So there's that added cost with the car. But in general, with two-wheelers, they have, you know, specific maintenances that are needed. Modern cars, sometimes they go 100,000 miles before you need to change the spark plugs. Maybe the whole car's worn out by then anyways, so who knows. But scooters and motorcycles in general, they just need a lot more maintenance. And I rent out motorcycles, so I know what the cost to maintain them and how often you got to do tires. For instance, on a motorcycle, you might have a $300 rear tire, only lasts about 6,000 miles. Some people like to squeeze further mileage out of tires, and you have your comfort level of how bald you want to run it. But I just want to give you what it would cost if you come into Vespa Motorsport in 2025 and you're going to own each of these scooters for 12 years. What do you think it would cost? You know, put in the comment, what do you think this would cost, each one of these for 12,000 miles? What do you think the competition costs? I'm just kind of curious what people's thoughts are. So I kind of generated a repair order just to figure it out. So if we did 12,000 miles on this GTS, we did all the factory services. So a first service is 625 miles, the 6,000 mile service, a 12,000 mile service. In the middle of that mix, we flushed the brake fluid and the coolant. And just for reference, what I think you'd need in 12,000 miles, and I'm talking, we'll end in 12,000 miles with a fully maintained scooter, you're gonna need one front tire, probably gonna need 2 rear tires, so I calculate with Michelin City Grip 2 tires. The scooter's gonna be under warranty, so any other defects that may occur would likely be covered. So for 12,000 miles, 2 years, I have estimated $2,200 in service. So that comes out to about 18 cents a mile. So it kind of gives you an idea of what this would cost if you had to pay for service. And in many ways, that's not too bad. I calculated almost the worst case, an MP3 530. That scooter needs a tremendous amount of service between 0 and 12,000 miles. You need more tires, you need more brakes. This won't even need brakes, likely in 12,000 miles, unless you're really heavy on the brakes. And a scooter like that, in 12,000 miles, you're gonna need around $3,000 worth of service. So a substantially higher number, so about 25 cents a mile on a complicated scooter like that. And that's similar to a nice motorcycle. If you had a BMW GS 1250, you're probably in that same range, about $3,000 for every 12,000 miles if you're gonna service that vehicle exactly as per what the manufacturer recommends. So we're gonna move on to the Primavera. And you have slightly smaller tires. They are a pretty similar cost. I'm gonna upgrade the scooter to the Michelin City Grip tires, so more premium tires. And we'll do the same services. So first service, 6,000 mile service, and a 12,000 mile service. And it comes in about $1,900 for those 2 years and 12,000 miles worth of services. So it's 16 cents a mile is what this would cost you to operate if you're gonna rack up about 6,000 miles a year over 2 years. So kind of giving you a good reference. And I did some other calculations of other competitor scooters. They all come in pretty similar, believe it or not. Some people love to say Hondas and Yamahas need so much less maintenance. Go look at the service. Before you buy that, look at the service chart. Go over to the service manager and ask for a quote on that major service. And it's going to come out pretty similar to what these will. And I know firsthand because I service several Honda and Yamaha scooters for customers in town. They're pretty similar, is what it comes down. It's not going to be drastically cheaper. The only way it's going to be drastically cheaper is if you do it yourself and you're confident enough to do the services as how the manufacturer recommends and not make errors. Of course, you can be cheap and take shortcuts as well and not do all the service, but I wouldn't recommend that. It's a two-wheel vehicle. Kind of want to be as safe as it can be during any situation. That's kind of my thought on it. And the opposite spectrum, a buddy scooter is super simple. They're simple to service, but the factory recommendation, they want service every 2,000 miles. So those end up costing more than a Primavera or GTS over 12,000 miles, believe it or not, if you're going to service it as per what the factory recommends. And in that case, I'd almost recommend when that scooter is out of warranty, you could probably stretch the services. I'm not sure why they have such an extreme service interval on the Buddy, but that's just something I found. So take it as a grain of salt, but that's what I come up with. And I do have customers that service their scooters regularly, and that's how you're going to come up with the best outcome and minimize your breakdowns and have a safe scooter, keeping it serviced during the life of the ownership of that vehicle. All right, so a quick rundown of the features that you don't get with the Primavera and you get with the GTS. As you can see, it's got these nice running lights that are turned on. In the European market, you get the running lights, but here in North America, you get these lovely looking pods. Fortunately, at scooterwest.com, we do have an option to convert all this to be back to the working European spec. On the GTS, you can see I have it on the side stand. On the Primavera 150 or the Sprint, the side stand is always an option. It's a pretty inexpensive option to add, but it's never been included with the 150 or 50cc scooter. For the foot pegs, some may argue these aren't the most comfortable for your passenger because they kind of have to straddle the wider butt of a GTS, but there's a solution to extend those pegs. But they do have a nicer integrated foot peg that folds into the body, and that's been with the GTS ever since it was introduced in 2005, while the Primavera's just got a basic solution, which is that plastic pad for a passenger to rest their feet on. Comfort-wise for a passenger, if I was a passenger and I'm a skinny little dude, like I don't know, 140 pounds, I'd prefer to be on this actually, believe it or not, just because it's got that narrow body and you're not having to straddle such a big scooter. So keep that in mind for passenger. Just because it's bigger doesn't mean it's necessarily better, for passenger comfort. The one thing to keep in mind, if you do add the top box that's color matched to the scooter for a GTS, it does come with a passenger backrest pad that's matched to the seat, while the Primavera or Sprint bubble or top case, as you like to call it, you got to buy that backrest as an option. They both have the little fobs that open up the seat. Like I said, one's got the complete keyless fob. They both have full LED lights for the tail light and brake light and the headlight. If you notice, the Primavera headlight comes on right when you turn the key, while the GTS has a relay that turns the headlight on after you start the scooter. The instruments are pretty similar. They give you pretty much all the same information as of the more modern 2024 update on the Primavera and the 2023 update on the GTS. They both have a USB-A style plug for charging your phone in the glove box. And one last thing, you can see these little bar end weights that kind of add to a more premium finish. You can actually hollow out the grips on the Primavera and add bar ends. They put a little bit more weight on the handlebars to kind of just isolate some of the vibration. As for smoothness, I feel they're pretty comparable. The 300, they have more isolation. They keep the vibration from the motor, but you gotta keep in mind a bigger motor vibrates more. There's just like no way around it. So in some ways, I feel this is a little bit smoother scooter. Suspension-wise, they have a very similar style of suspension on the front. The Primavera has the same suspension setup they've had for several years now. The GTS has an extra link, an anti-dive link that they added in 2023 to the newer fork design. So I feel it's a little bit better fork on the GTS, especially over the prior generations of the Vespa GTS. Kind of handles the bumps a little bit better. Braking performance, I would recommend putting centered brakes on the GTS. We have those pads available, give it a little bit extra stopping power. While the Primavera, I feel it's adequate for the size, but there's certainly upgrades to the brakes. If you look at my old video with the robot Vespa, I put the full Brembo setup if you really want lots of braking. For the rear, it's got the ultra simple drum brake. Nothing wrong with it. It's just kind of old style, low tech, completely mechanical. There's no hydraulic system. You do have to occasionally adjust the cable. I feel it has adequate stopping power for this size scooter, while if you move to the GTS, they have a rear disc brake that's hydraulic, that's also tied in with the ABS system. So you got ABS brakes for the rear, which is probably a good idea because you're more likely going to accidentally lock up the rear and have the rear slide out on you than lock up the front in many cases. So having the safety system of the dual channel front and rear ABS is definitely a more superior system over the more simplified mechanical rear brake and the ABS system on the front. So I hope that helps you make a better informed decision whether you're looking for a new Vespa or a used Vespa, just some of the comparisons. And my best suggestion is get some experience. You probably start out with either one. As a new rider, I would definitely recommend some sort of training if you're just going into this new. You don't want to damage your beautiful new scooter. But a lot of times it's just personal preference. I would highly suggest being able to ride both of them firsthand so you know kind of what works best. And at minimum, just straddle them while they're off the stand, put them both on the center stand, and just see what fits you better. Maybe you're only going to use this in a dense urban environment, but you just like that extra power to get in front of the traffic at the lights. You know, maybe the 300 would be a better situation, but maybe you like the lighter weight package that's a little bit more nimble and just easier to handle, and that's where the 150 may be an advantage. And you know, obviously there's the price difference as well. You know, that may be influence in your purchasing decision. But there's Robot's insight on the main differences between the Primavera and GTS. I've done test rides in the past, talked about the performance. Yeah, no doubt about it, the 300 is just faster. In my opinion, it's plenty fast for everything in an urban environment. While if you're on a suburban road, a highway, you're going to definitely start knowing the limits of this 150cc motor and know it just doesn't have anymore. You know, going up a hill or on the flats trying to hold 55, 60 miles an hour, and that's all it's got. So I'll see you on the next one. Robot here from Vespa Motorsport and ScooterWest.com. Thanks for listening to my nice long podcast video.